It's finally that time of the set again when hero augments are OP. They are the best comps currently on the 15.4 B patch. So if you don't know how to play some of them, you're giving away a ton of free LP. There's been some small and big recent discoveries in the recent patch, so even if you're familiar, it's worth going over for the refresher course. Here's everything you need to know to succeed. Whenever you're approaching how to play hero augments in any set, here are the 3 most important things you have to consider. The first is you must figure out items ASAP. You need to find 3 items as fast as you can for your carry because you have so much concentration of power in one unit and it doesn't help the rest of your team. If you funnel all of your power into one champion and you only have 1 item, you can imagine that you're just down 2/3 of your augment because you're just not getting the effective value of your hyper carry. And this directly relates to the second point, which is encounters and trying to play hero augments on encounters that are really likely to give you items, whether they're direct component anvils, or you have things like Scuttle Puddle, Crab Rave, Loot Subscription. There's a lot of ways that you can get items through some of these encounters that will likely get you to full power as soon as quickly. In these encounters that can give you items quickly, you ideally want to finish your 3-item carry basically in stage 2. Another point about items I want to drive home is that because you're playing a hero augment on board, you're likely to actually even win fights because one of your units is already strong and you have to field it. You likely won't be able to go for a full loss streak a lot of times when you're playing hero augments, unless you just want to directly sack and just not play that hero, which is a little bit rare. And so because of that, you're not going to be able to get first or sometimes even second pick on the carousel. So therefore, your items are already going to be kind of cooked. So if your items don't make sense for your hero augment, you probably don't even want to necessarily consider it too much. For example, let's take the Shen Hero Augment. He is so dependent on so many bows that if you start off with something like a tier, a belt, and a vest, and you have 1 Shen, that's still going to be very difficult to get to your Shen items, even if you get the perfect item off carousel, and you also get the perfect item drops later on. So I have to drive home, make sure your items make sense even a little bit. If you have 1 bow or 1 rod, in the case of Shen, for example, I think you can go for it. But if you have no items, it's going to be really tough. The second point is a pretty easy TFT fundamental, which is the more copies you have, the more likely you're going to hit. And basically, it just accelerates your game plan because one of the win conditions for hero augments is to basically snowball and push your levels so that way you can get access to the high tier units. And so the more copies you have, the more likely you are to hit quickly. So this one's a pretty obvious one. Don't need to harp on it too much. Basically, just try to play if you have extra copies of it. If you're ready for Zac 2, click the hero augment. If you have a Mundo pair, obviously that's going to be insane. The exception is Neeko as a hero augment. I think it's actually really dangerous to be holding Neeko in the early stages of the game if you don't have anything that connects to it. And so it's actually not necessarily good to be holding a Neeko and then just like hoping that you hit a hero augment. Instead, what you really want to think about is, are you already holding things like protectors? Maybe you're holding Malphite because you thought that you could play into crew, or you're holding Star Guardians like Rel 2 and Syndra 2. Then the Neeko hero augment becomes really good, even just at 1 star without the copies. And then point number 3, that's going to be very annoying, is that you have to scout to see if people are going to contest you adjacently. So for example, if you see someone playing crew reroll with Malphite and they're just calling crew, that probably means Shen's going to be a lot harder to hit. I've also seen people take both the Vi and the Mundo hero augment in the same lobby, and they end up just holding each other's units directly because you're trying to play a bunch of juggernauts. So just make sure that no one is taking around your tree so that way you don't feel like you're put in a really tough spot where you can't hit. This tier list is going to be a little bit weird because we have 2 things in B tier, but I'm going to run down through it very quickly. The best hero augment in the game is Give Him the Chair Dr. Mundo. This composition, I think if we were to be really truthful, is probably the best composition just overall, not even just reroll. And it's not particularly close because of how much it can snowball leads and get really far ahead. And it still has a really high cap because 6 Juggernaut can actually cap around a bunch of 5 costs very, very easily. Best in slot Mundo is Rageblade, Infinity Edge, and either Striker's Fail or Giant Slayer. Feel free to slam either. So you really can't go wrong taking swords and bows in this composition whatsoever. And the best power fruits for Mundo is Max Vitality. This one is definitely the best scaling one for him because it's really OP. But you can also click over 9,000, Critical Threat, Double Strike. The interesting thing about this composition is that you oftentimes want to roll for Vi as the duo because they actually buffed Vi's base stats for her heal, and she actually becomes much more reliable. She can also hold carry items as well. So let's say you have Vi hold tank items, but later on you get a bunch of extra swords, right? Let's say you took all the swords and gloves and bows off carousel and you get dropped more swords and you're like, what do I do with them? You can actually put Vi with the carry items and move this over to say a set 2 or maybe even Udyr if you're rolling for like Udyr 3 as well. But you just basically give Vi the utility and then have Mundo whale it, and it should be able to be good enough for most of the mid game. Your late game cap is going to be with 4 Luchador. You're going to play Lee Sin as the Juggernaut, and then you go for Braum as another unit that can also duo carry. And with so much AD, you should be able to close out the game. And if you even need stuff beyond that, you can think about playing 6 Juggernaut with, Twisted Fate, for example, or Zyra. Some other augments to really consider. Lineup has a lot of synergy with Juggernauts in general because Juggernauts have so much damage reduction, and you want to have resistances to mix in. It's just an extra way to make your frontline tanky, and you're playing so many units in the front, so you get a lot of extra resistances. Keepers is also really good because it just keeps your durability high by having a shield on the Juggernaut, so that way they keep all their maximum durability. Any composition that plays Keepers is generally good. Radiant Refractor is also really strong. If you get Radiant Refractor, try to go for maximum damage on Mundo. I believe Giant Slayer is his best, but if you don't get Giant Slayer, try to go for a Striker's Flail. And then the other thing I want to cover, which was kind of shown in our little tier list, is that he's really good with range extension, fishbones, and sniper's focus, but he also is pretty good with gold collector as well. I'm not entirely sure how often you're going to be encountering that, but sometimes you might be missing an item. If you do go for gold collector, you're going to need an Infinity Edge. So you're going to go Infinity Edge, gold collector, plus the Ginsu's Rageblade. On 6, go for 4 Juggernaut and Luchador, and then finish your 3 stars there, then push levels and just add more Juggernauts over time. On level 7, you can play a Heavyweight, for example, since you are playing Aatrox, and then level 8, go for 6 Juggernaut and win the game. The other really strong hero augment is Perfect Form Zac. They buffed Wraith, and they buffed Heavyweights, so it ends up just being really good for Zac Hero Augment in particular. Zac has a really unusual property with his Perfect Form Balloon. It ends up doing a lot more damage with crit than I think Riot were expecting it to be the case. I think when we were building this, a lot of times we were building like Archangels and maybe Warmogs and other things like that, but the crit build just does so much damage and it's amplified off of the Wraith, so it just ends up becoming extremely strong. So best in slot is Jewel Gauntlet, Striker's Flail, and Edge of Night, and once again, if you don't have Striker's Flail this meta, just play Giant Slayer. It's also really, really good. Zac doesn't have that many good artifacts. He only has 1 right now, and it's just Zhonya's. Zhonya's is really, really strong on him, and it's really good, but it just replaces the Edge of Night. A lot of times in the past, people used to reroll Kayle with Zac Hero Augment, but it's actually not necessary anymore. What's nice about Kayle is that she ends up being like one of the best appliers of anti-heal. So if you have red buff from Morello and you're level 9, she actually shoots pretty significant waves, so that's pretty nice. A lot of times when it happens is you just hit Zac 3 and then you just push levels while just kind of building secondary tank items. The priority is often, roll for Zac 3 on level 4 and 5 at the beginning of the stage 3, then start to just build tank items for your duo carry. A lot of times it'll be Kabuko and then putting it onto Cassante. And then you just throw whatever AD items on Varus or whatever AP items on Malzahar, so on and so forth. The best power-up for Zac is Fusion Dance. And if you do have Fusion Dance, maybe we should show positioning there, but Aatrox should be the one eaten because he's the least important unit. And of course, you can go for a tank or you can go for Varus. So a lot of times you probably put on Cassante until you hit Varus, but you might have to figure out like how you actually play that mid-game yourself. Until you hit 6 Wraith, you're oftentimes going to play 4 Heavyweight for a while. So look for Poppy, or you can just have Jace and Darius in the meantime as well. The thing about positioning with Zac is that it's pretty much random. It's really, really hard to predict where Zac's going to go. So as long as you just generally keep Zac safe, that's the most important thing. And because he kind of trolls, that's why Edge of Night is really, really important to him, because if he gets targeted, he might wander into a place where you don't want him to be, and he just gets bursted down. The best Radiant items, if you get like an upgrade choice with Radiant Refractor, is Striker's Flail first, and then Jewel Gauntlet. Because at a certain point, you don't really want Jewel Gauntlet to just give you more crit. You just want to actually deal more bonus damage. And Edge of Night is not very good on him for Radiant, so try not to upgrade that if you can avoid it. Some other augments to think about if you are playing around Zac is just things that help him get survivability, like last second save and second win. But if you have Water Lotus, for example, you don't need the Jewel Gauntlet. Instead, you can build just, finding ways to get more crit, or you can even have other damage amp items on him, for example. And the other thing, too, is that this is the best reason to click Protagonist. Protagonist is just really, really strong. It's actually strong for all of these hero augments, but for Zac, it's especially really powerful. Its win rate is extremely high. 9,000 volts Kennen is kind of the weirdest augment to play because it feels like one of the only hero augments that's legitimately not strong in the early game until you get everything online. And that's because you kind of need to have like the Protectors and the Supreme Cells kind of working together. And Kennen 2 can do decently, but you kind of need to get like the Ginsu's Rageblade and the Giant Slayer on him. Jewel Gauntlet is also really important. He's also really good with Heavy as the Crown on top of his artifacts that we listed. So Static Shift, Flicker Blades, and Crown of Demacia is something to consider for Kennen. Very, very strong if you end up getting it, because Protectors stall out for so long that you end up getting a bunch of scaling stats. The comp flow is a little bit weird because once you roll for Kennen 3, unlike other hero augments where you finish your one cost, you just kind of push levels, right? So if you finish Zac or you finish Garen, you just kind of push levels and add the rest of your trade. Kennen kind of wants to stay at lower levels similar to crew and roll for, you know, the 2 costs, but it doesn't feel like it get fully online until you get 6 protector. So it's like one of those weird things where your duo carry might change. You might not even go for Rakan 3. You might be in a situation where you go and you push levels and you look for Neeko 3, or you just tank Cassante 2. If you do end up in a situation where you're pushing levels and you're not reeling for Janna and Rakan, you could duo carry Akali, but your mileage may vary. I just don't think it's Akali's a very good unit right now. And then the other element too is you might notice that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and we still don't have 4 Supreme Cells. So Supreme Cell emblem ends up being quite solid here, so you can fit the entire composition on 8, but it's gonna be hard to fit. You also could get a Protector emblem, drop something like Malphite, and play a Supreme Cell if you need. Make sure you try to position Kennen ideally where you can get a lot of value off his shurikens that can stun. And then if you are in a situation where you think you can get to the enemy carry, sometimes Kennen can do a lot of damage there. And then you might even have the opportunity where both Akali and Kennen can assassinate the backline. It's very, very good. The best Radiant item on Kennen generally is Ginsu's Rage Blade, but you could go for Radiant Giant Slayer as a secondary option. Just as a general rule, anybody that plays Radiant Rage Blade wants to play Radiant Giant Slayer as the Radiant as well. It's just very, very powerful in the comp. Twilight Assault Shen also got buffed, and this is a really fun hero augment that specifically has a couple of insane combos. The first is that if you get Raid Boss with this hero augment, I think this augment combination literally like is a 50 to 60% first place rate. It's insane. If you're able to get that, it is ridiculously OP. The second is that Shen is also really good with Crown Demacia as well. I think people might know about Flicker Blades, maybe even Sniper's Focus for the build, but I think Crown Demacia is also insane on him because it's a very, very slow composition, so he ends up just kind of one-shotting a lot of stuff. And also, I have a sneaking suspicion that Double Rage Blade might be better than Hex Tech Gunblade, but that is just really a heavy emphasis on the bows, so I'm not sure if you're able to get that. So pragmatically speaking, it's just more likely you're going to get 2 swords and 2 bows as opposed to 3 bows. Very similar to Mundo and Vi, you're going to be rolling for this composition mainly on 6, and you're going to be playing 4 Bastion plus Edgelord. You also have an opportunity to just play 6 Bastion and forget about the Edgelords. If you hit like an early Leona, that's also okay. But I think it's better to just play Edgelord just to activate a little bit of the attack speed and Omnivamp, which can be pretty nice. This composition is really good with defensive augments. Anything that just gives shield or extra HP is really obscenely good. And if you do get the Radiant Refactored, the best Radiant item is Rage Blade or Giant Slayer for Shen. Knuckle Duster's Vi is a snowball-based composition, and this one is probably the most nuanced hero augment that we probably want to talk about. Knuckle Duster's Vi specifically needs a snowball because the more she's able to kill, the more she's able to drop a component onto the board or even snowball your gold. And so the more you're able to get gold, the more you're able to roll, the more you're able to kind of compound your lead further and further. So the most important thing with Vi is pretty much just slamming items on her. If you don't get Infinity Edge and Hodge and you have, you know, Steris Gauge, Bloodthirster, Titans, just slam those instead and try to win streak and get as many kills as possible with Vi. That's the most important thing. You can always figure out your items later because, you know, in the worst case scenario, if you have a bunch of these other fighter items like excess amount of Hodge, Bloodthirster, Titans, Steris Gauge, you can always put it on another Juggernaut or put it on Lee Sin. The other thing too is your backline carry can be really different. Even though you roll for Vi 2 on 6, a lot of times you're rolling for Jhin, but let's say Jhin is contested for whatever reason. People are playing a Protector Sniper build, and you just don't feel like you can find the Jhin. You can always just skip the Jhin and play for something like a Jinx 2. You can also play for a Smolder in the back line, or you can go for something like Ashe, Juggernaut Ashe. Anything that's just basically played as a backline carry that can complement anything here. So Duelist, Luchador, if you play like Gnar instead, maybe find Soul Fighters as well. So it's actually quite versatile and dynamic, and that's partially what makes, I think, Knuckle Duster's Vi really interesting as a hero augment because your duo carry can change every single game. Vi also has a couple of really interesting artifacts. I think she's fantastic with range extension, so she can kind of punch and get her damage in, and she does some big AoE. So Rapid Fire Cannon and Sniper Focus are really good. She's also really good with like melee assassin tools, so Prowler's Claw and Spectral Cutlass are really good. She generally doesn't have the best in slot Radiant, but if you were to choose one, I believe Radiant Hand of Justice is the best to give her a balance of offense and defense. So try to go for Radiant Hand of Justice on Vi if you do end up finding a Radiant Refactor. Starfall Neeko is high risk, high reward. This is the hero augment that is the hardest to get online, but it has some of the biggest payoff because if you just look at it and you just type Neeko into our search bar here, you're actually going to see that a handful of compositions want to play Neeko, and especially if they're playing like a reroll composition oriented around it, like Kog'Maw, or finding a way to play around like some reroll Xayah stuff, they might be holding like a lot of copies of Neeko. Just because the way the pool goes, if you see 2 people chasing Neeko and you have this hero augment, you absolutely need something like duplicators to finish it because you're just unlikely to hit. So just keep that in mind. Best in slot Neeko is Archangels and Edge of Night. The third item is pretty flexible. Jewel Gauntlet is good, but you can also go like double Archangels. So just basically make sure you have one form of scaling her and you can keep her safe. Definitely don't build like the Bloodthirster Titans build onto Neeko. She doesn't want that at all. She just wants the safety of the Edge of Night and to scale over and over. The other thing about Neeko that's really interesting is also the similarities between her and Vi. Her backline carry can change every single game. You can play Starfall Neeko and then play 6 Protector with, say, a Kog'Maw backline, which is kind of similar to what we have here. We have listed here that you can play Janna. You also can just play Rise as well, and then just like start playing around Strategists or some Executioners. You can even play Akali, which is kind of crazy, a Protector Akali, but that's kind of unlikely since they want almost the exact same items. But let's just say you're in such a weird scenario where you have exactly the same items, you can go for that. So just build the Neeko, build the tank items, and then start building your duo carry, because you really need to make sure that your Protector core is strong. This positioning that we have is actually slightly outdated. This was basically a way that you can have anti-Akali positioning back when Akali was meta. So this is just like a suggested way to play around the Akali dash. Just play a straight front line otherwise. So probably just move Rakan over here. The most important power for Neeko by far is Crimson Veil, because she just needs to outlast and now sustain. It's the same concept as Akali, which is she has the inevitability, and this gives her the healing for her to sustain while making sure that she can use that shield from Protector to get the value. If you don't get Crimson Veil, try over 9,000 or some of these other scaling ones. But overall, I think Crimson Veil is just so good. It just has so much synergy with Protector. Neeko's best artifact by far is Zhonya's Paradox, but she's also really good with Mana Zane and Wit's End. This is some recent discoveries about this hero augment that are really good. Mana Zane just helps her get casting very quickly, and then Wit's End is basically like another form of Crimson Veil and staying alive. If you do have those items, they replace the Jewel Gauntlet here. So just make sure that you don't replace the Archangels, because that's a really, really important item for her. Schoolyard Justice Garen is better this patch. They buffed Leona, and this is going to apply to both Garen and Malphite, but the big innovation we discovered is Bloodthirster Titans and Shojin are the 2 builds that you want to go for on Malphite. Malphite actually has a secondary carry build where you can build Jewel Gauntlet, Hodge, and Nashers, but that doesn't apply to Garen. And that's because Malphite specifically works off the crit here, and he cares about that, while Garen does not. Garen's win condition is just to cast a lot, stack a bunch of HP, and stall out for the Yuumi, who basically holds the AP items. This augment is mainly insane off of protagonist, but if you don't get enough protagonist and you try to play it off of Schoolyard Justice, you pretty much need Shojin. Shojin is the most important item on Garen by far. And then you can go for Bloodthirster Titans or Titans and Staircase, something like that is totally fine. Garen's also apparently good with Innervating Locket, so if you do get an opportunity to play around that Locket, you can go for it. But he's not really good with that many other builds, so yeah, just try to go with Innervating Locket as the only thing. And then for Malphite, you want to play Classic Crew. You don't want to play for the Jhin Sniper variation, because Malphite is not the tank in this composition. It's usually Shen. The win condition of Crew is pretty much the same for Tectonic Malphite, which is you just need to have items on all your crew units. Shen wants to be the tank for Malphite, and you do want to put him in the front for the Strategist Emblem, or for the Strategist Shield, rather. A lot of people just ask all the time, do I want to like build the Malphite in the front, or do I want to put it in the back for the damage amp? Put him in the front. Survivability and have him cast is really big. And this Shojin is basically supposed to replace what Rageblade did in the past to help him spam cast. And the best power up to get for him is Mage, for him to be able to double cast. I've seen people greed a lot for other different things, like Not Done Yet, Final Form, and 100 push-ups, but I'm pretty sure Mage is just the best. Because you have to remember one thing, that if you take Final Form, or you take some of these like super scaling augments, you're not going to have the power for a long time. And especially if you go Final Form and you go for like a 4-star champion on your hero augment, you're not going to have any power up for 3 stages. So it's going to be a very long time before you get value. That being said, if you survive and somehow get there, it's absolutely bonkers. So it definitely could be worth it, especially if you're, one of the situations where you just are high rolling super early and you feel like you're very likely to get it and you're just, win streaking anyways. One important tip about Tectonic Malphite that is also very true of the Classic Crew variation is you don't want to actually push levels for higher odds unless you finish everything at that tier. You might hit Malphite 3 early, and you might be thinking, oh, maybe I should just like go to 6 and roll so that way I can have increased odds for Sivir and Shen and Ziggs. just roll at the level that you have because you don't want to spend your gold leveling because it's more efficient to roll, especially since you get 1 gold of that back into your EXP. So you actually are being hyper gold efficient. So just stay at the level when you roll. Only move up if you have nothing to roll at that tier. The rule is 1 cost on 5, 2 cost on 6, 3 cost on 7, 4 cost on 8. So if you're rolling for Shen, you have to roll on 6. If you're rolling for Ziggs, roll on 7. Don't try to push extra levels unless you feel like you absolutely have to, or maybe you're forced to. Otherwise, you're just going to be really far behind. Just to drive home the point of how important some of these builds are for the hero augments, this is a filter of a data of looking at what is the performance of Malphite with and without Shojin at just the highest sample size we have. If you don't have Shojin on Malphite, you just go from a winning composition with a pretty decent first rate all the way to a losing composition. And so make sure you're building things like that Shojin on Malphite. And the same thing with Garen as well. If you just toggle and you disable, we have no Shojin on Garen whatsoever. The performance of the composition drops significantly to being pretty average. This might be covering the situations where maybe Garen is also tanking as well. But you can see the noticeable difference of having Garen with that Shojin. It is huge for your win rate. All right, those are all my tips for hero augments. A lot to break down, so I hope you guys learned a thing or two, especially since I think some of you guys knew parts, bits, and pieces of it. But hopefully this full in-depth coverage gave you everything you need to know so you can climb. Click on those hero augments and get all that free LP this patch. That's it for me this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.